One of the fascinating things about next week's budget is it will, in a lot of ways, not just define how Canada responds to the provocations from the Trump administration. It may indeed come to define Mark Carney's own political identity.
Welcome to WONK. The federal budget is by any measure going to be big. It'll be big in size. Some estimates suggest the deficit could be north of $100 billion. And it's big in importance in the middle of a trade war, for sure, and in the depths of a Canadian-made economic productivity problem. And for the first time, it's a budget that will be presented in a new way that separates long-term investment from operations spending. Not to mention, it's going to have to find support somewhere in the House to be passed at all. That's a lot of pressure on one budget. To chew it over, we've reconvened our WONK panel with two of Canada's big thinkers on policy. Armine Yalnizyan is a leading economist, columnist, and the Atkinson Fellow on the future of workers. Sean Speer is PPF's Senior Advisor of Strategic Competitiveness, Editor-at-Large at The Hub, and a former Senior Economic Advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Good to have both of you with us.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, good to be with both of you.
So we know, as is the case with most budgets, we know some of what is coming here, and much is telegraphed in advance. I wanted to start really big picture, and Armine, I'll start with you. There's this sense that this is going to be a generational, that this is going to be, that there are going to be sort of huge kind of visionary shifts in this in a number of different ways. What's your take on that aspect of this budget, how important it is, I guess?
I can't remember a budget that's more important because we have never been under attack by our ally and most integrated trading partner. So what the feds decide to do to deal with an unprovoked economic attack, the likes of which we've never seen, has got to be big. That's why it's generational. It's not generational because it's going to run up the deficit. It's not generational because it's going to change the way it cooks the books. It is generational because of the defense budget and what it's promised for that. But that's also related to this economic and political attack from south of the border. And there's no country on the surface of the planet that is more exposed to this vituperative approach to living on the planet.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I agree with everything Armine said. And I would just push a bit further. The other reason why I think it is big, Amanda, is that since Mark Carney transitioned from central banker to political actor, he has sought to balance what is a pretty broad and diverse political coalition that brought him to power in April's election. It ranges from progressives on one end that he brought over from the New Democratic Party to centrist business types on Bay Street. And at different parts of his prime ministership, he's nodded to these different elements of his base, if I can put it that way. And I think one of the fascinating things about next week's budget is it will, in a lot of ways, not just define how Canada responds to the provocations from the Trump administration. It may indeed come to define Mark Carney's own political identity. How does he fit the way we typically think about politicians? How will his government balance, on one hand, his commitment to investment with, on the other hand, his commitment to fiscal discipline? In a way, this budget looms large precisely because of what it will tell us about the prime minister and what it will tell us about his government.
So then let's combine those two thoughts, which is we know we're in this era of change, right? Our trading partner isn't just causing trouble, it's rewriting the rules of the game. And I think at this point, wise minds will say we're never getting back to where we were. There will be a new course ahead. Whatever it looks like, it's going to be different. We've heard some things already. Obviously, the big kind of out of the gate, Armine, was around energy policy, resource policy, which sounds good and certainly might kind of reinvigorate capital back to this country. Those are long-term projects. And, you know, even if you move fast, they're still long-term. Have you heard anything that gives you a sense that our economy is going to be okay, regardless of what happens in the next 18 to 24 months with that trade agreement?
Oh, I have heard nothing that makes me feel like we're going to be okay. I know everybody's predicting that we're growing at 1.2% this year, 1 point something percent next year. people are talking as if we're going to dodge a recession. And I understand that it's very difficult to talk about we may be facing a recession, but we're not even recession ready. At the last count, we had 1.6 million people unemployed. This is before the full impact of Trump's technique, his strategy is going to bear fruit in the economy. And of those 1.6 million people, about 550,000 of them had access to jobless benefits. That's less than a third. And of the people that are accessing jobless benefits, a whole bunch of those people are earning something like six figures in manufacturing, in steel, in aluminum, in softwood lumber, in oil and gas, and all of these things where with overtime and with unionized work, they're earning more than they will ever get back out of EI, which means more people are going to lose their mortgages. More people are going to not be able to refinance, and they'll end up in a rental market, which is already undersupplied. And then the people, so many of these industries are in one-horse towns. And if the production facility shuts down, there's an immediate trigger effect of economic decline in all the services in that sector. And the service sector is highly demarcated by low-wage workers, especially in hospitality, especially in retail. Those people are living in rented accommodations now. If they lose their jobs at close to the minimum wage and only get 55%, in terms of income replacement, they're going to lose their apartments because they're barely making ends meet now. So we're talking about not being recession ready and not doing anything about EI, which is our only system of macroeconomic stabilization that has not been fit for purpose since the mid-1990s. And this is the real test. This is the moment we are being tested as to how we can reduce the depth of a downturn and the duration of a downturn.
To be fair, they have made some changes to EI, right? They have adjusted it, extended the duration for certain sectors.
Yeah, it's all temporary.
Topped
it's all
it up
targeted,
for others.
Amanda.
It's temporary,
and targeted. It's like we know what the fixes are and we're not doing them. Yeah. And this moment is going to challenge us to do something to be recession ready. And it's like, la, 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 I can't hear you. It's like,
may I make 2 points? One, to give Armine her due, and then something separate and unrelated. Just the first on this point about the inadequacy of EI coverage. Armine and others were making this case in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic when we had to create an extraordinary emergency program precisely because EI could not be the tip of the spear when it came to sustaining incomes in the face of large-scale unemployment. In the intervening time, we've done nothing to get at that root problem. And so if we see large-scale unemployment for which EI cannot be the full solution, the government may have no choice but to fall back on a customized program like we saw during the pandemic, which would represent a failure on the part of all policymakers to solve the problem that caused us to have to do something extraordinary in the first place. Just secondly, though, on the subject of capital, one of the things that worries me a great deal, Amanda, is that one of the key motivations behind Trump's tariffs isn't merely to negotiate a better deal. It's to create incentives that pull capital and production from countries like Canada into the United States over the tariff wall in order to access the U.S. market, essentially tariff-free. If that is right, then we need to fortify our economy to try to offset the incentives inherent in those tariffs, particularly because the nature of the Trump administration is such that when companies do bring their capital in the United States, they're not going to do it quietly, right? They're going to do it as loudly and boisterously as possible in order to curry favor with the president, which I think risks creating a vicious cycle where competitors in other industries start to match. So if we want to avoid a large sucking sound coming out of Canadian capital and production into the United States, I think some pretty radical ideas need to be on the table to make Canada as attractive as possible when countries are making those judgments about where to put capital and where to put production.
So at the risk of undermining my statement previously that we need to just wise up to the fact that the game has changed. The analogy here is that we had this neighbor and they let us use their lawn to cut across, and we sold that right away to other people. We rented it out to people. And now the neighbor said, you can't cut across our lawn anymore, so we can't collect the rent from people. The auto companies will go south if our auto pact is over in its current form. So obviously job number one, Armine, is let's keep it together together. Let's actually persuade the United States of America to let us have auto manufacturing, even though there's not really an earthly reason why we do. We agreed in the, 40 years ago that we were going to. One way to do that, and this is for both of you, this is not about the budget, by the way. This is, I'm getting a little bit sort of more into the strategy around the trade talks, but is to play hardball. We have electricity that we sell to them that we could cut. This is sort of about a Doug Ford's playbook. We could cut off all access to any critical minerals now and forever. We could, talk about the clean drinking water that we possess. All of the things that we have in our favor, should we be playing hardball right now instead of trying to reimagine an economy that will take decades and decades to actually achieve?
It depends on whether you think you can get a deal with the United States. And there's no other country on earth that needs that more badly than Canada does.
Yes.
And
Sure.
so I think I sure wouldn't want to be the prime minister right now or that team. And I don't think anybody that's in opposition has better ideas because his MO is keep everybody on their back foot because they don't know what's coming next. I don't think there is a way of getting a deal that's sustained. So to your point about playing hardball, every time we play, there was a bloody ad during, the World Series game that caused him to break off negotiations. Like, is that hardball? Putting on an ad saying the obvious? So anything triggers. Like, he's got a hair trigger temper that I think if you want to go play hardball, go for it. You can flex your muscle, but what you're going to get back is a pie in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does remind me of if you aim at the devil, make sure you don't miss. I mean, if you're going to play hardball, you have to do it right.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And we also need to keep in mind that setting aside even for a minute the obvious asymmetry between the two countries and our economies, it's just striking the more we understand our economic relationship, which we've all become experts on in the past several months, how deeply integrated we are. We do more trade with small-size U.S. states than we do with most other countries around the world. So it just matters such a great deal for us, as Armine says, that the trade-offs are excruciating. If I had one criticism of the Prime Minister, though, along these lines, is he's not let Canadians in to the trade-offs before him, helped us understand what he's grappling with. Obviously, we can't be sitting at the table with them. There are aspects of these negotiations which are necessarily private. But one of the reasons that free trade has fallen out of favor more broadly around the advanced world is because of an increasing sense of a lack of small d democratic legitimacy. And so the Prime Minister has two challenges here. One is to secure some kind of deal with the Trump administration, and the second is to persuade Canadians that whatever that deal ultimately is the right one for the country. And my fear is he's spending so much focused on the former that he's not doing the type of work he's going to have to do to ultimately secure the latter.
Can I just say, Sean, while you're saying that, it all sounds terribly rational. This is not a rational moment. How do you convey to Canadians what is on the table? Because what's on the table is constantly changing. And who it is that's putting stuff on the table and taking stuff off the table is constantly changing. And when we talk about hardball, you take a look at the big sectors that he wants more of: auto, steel, aluminum, critical minerals, softwood lumber, all of these things, they are dominated by foreign ownership. Oil and gas is the only place where foreign ownership has been falling and Canadian ownership has been increasing, but that might be all up in the air too, right? Like there is no there at the moment. So when we
I agree. Go ahead, pardon me.
When we worry about how do we play tough, how do we preserve what we've got, we don't own it to preserve it. The people that own it are going to decide where they want to invest their capital so that they can be in the world's biggest consumer market. And it isn't us. So that's why I do not understand why more economists are saying we're not going to go into a recession, we're going to duck a recession. It's like we haven't even seen the worst yet.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, I'm really glad Armine brought this up because I've been actually beating this drum just to myself, really. But about, we just saw the U.S. government take stakes in two BC-based critical mineral companies.
There you go.
And I put my hand up and said, "Is this okay? It's unusual for the U.S. government to own directly stakes in publicly traded companies. Should we have a foreign review? Is there some reason why we're letting our AI companies be bought up by U.S. companies right now?" And as I say all those words, Sean, of course, the me that understands how capital flows work says if you put any kind of controls on, you're just shutting yourself down, and nobody will be here to invest at all, and you're just shooting yourself in the foot. What's the way forward?
You go, Sean.
There's so much to say in response to what has been said, including as you say, Amanda, the growing, I think, salience of a renewed economic nationalism. We've talked in the past, Amanda, about previous bouts of economic nationalism in Canada. That were incidentally came to be in broadly similar circumstances. A protectionist U.S. president who was unpopular in Canada, growing concerns about domestic ownership of particular industries and technologies, and so it's no surprise to me that we're seeing a similar resonance around those issues today. And I'm watching carefully to see what, if anything, we see on them out of the budget. But if I can just jump on Armine's point about the state of the economy, because it's so important. There's a lot of focus in the lead up to next week's budget on the spending side of the ledger. How much does spending grow? How much is spending reduced as part of this effort by the Carney government to reduce spending in particular types of areas? I wouldn't underestimate the impact of a deteriorating economy on the revenue side of the ledger. That is to say, before the government spends $1 or cuts $1, the deficit is going to look worse than it did in last year's fall economic statement. We published analysis at the Hub by Livio De Matteo, a Lakehead University professor, that estimates on average revenues could be down by something like $12 billion per year, which is almost the equivalent of 2 percentage points of the GST. And so when you start to kind of understand the severity of the economic harm of the Trump administration, it gives you a sense of the challenge that the Prime Minister and his finance minister have in constructing next week's budget.
Can I just jump right on top of that? Because I didn't read Livio De Matteo's analysis. But when you looked at what it was he said, what Carney said in the run-up to the election, he promised basically $60 billion in tax cuts. That's $12 billion a year just in own goal revenue cutting, right? Why did we do that? To out tax cut the only alternative that was on the agenda, so that we didn't go kind of balls out crazy on, here's the Trump agenda, Canadian version. Now, I want to go back to what you were saying, Amanda, about the 51st state wrapped in an American flag. We are the 51st state, economically speaking, and have been since the end of the Second World War. That's the way we built our economy. Free trade just doubled down on all of the things that created the supply chains that integrated us with the United States right from the get-go. So unscrambling these eggs is going to be very difficult to do. And it makes us look at industrial strategy in a brand new way. Now, I just want to present two other things. Number one, 75% of our economy and 80% of our jobs is in the service sector, not in the goods sector that we're all losing our marbles over. So I'm not saying that we don't want to control those things. We should want to control them. They're ours, right? Just like the Alberta Advantage is what is under their feet that God gave them. So we should want to control our water, our minerals, et cetera, et cetera. But just to point out that industrial strategy, there's crickets on the service sector in particular. The single biggest economic driver of the economy, which is the care economy. Health and social assistance together plus education is a bigger factor than anything, including real estate. And when it comes to jobs, it's more than twice as big as any of the other sources of jobs. It's the number one source of jobs, the way people earn their living. And it's in crisis, just like housing is, and there's crickets on it from everybody. You want a strong Canada, you've got to make sure the foundation of the economy, what is foundational to productivity, does not collapse in front of our eyes. And that's what we're doing. So I would say that industrial strategy is missing the plot on what we can do for ourselves to strengthen ourselves. The second thing I want to say is, as these owners of all these industries that are under attack because of the tariffs decide to relocate because they are not bound to Canada, this is going to impact, if we lose our industrial capacity, this is going to impact the very first thing we said we would do. Other than diversify trade internationally, we said we would strengthen internal trade. Guess what is the number one driver of internal trade? Jurisdictions that don't have a manufacturing base import stuff from the jurisdictions that do have a manufacturing base. Where are they? They're in Ontario and Quebec. And so if we lose that capacity in Ontario and Quebec, we also lose internal trade. It doesn't matter how many regulations you get rid of, how many taxes you cut. If we do not figure out a way of preserving the industrial capacity we have, we will no longer be the ninth largest economy on the surface of the planet. So figure out how you do more employee-owned stuff, more state-owned stuff, because we're going to lose it if we just let the market rip.
Sean, there's a lot to chew on there. Thoughts about that, and frame it if you will, because I want to keep bringing it back to somebody's putting together a budget document next week. What are the policies that should be in there that get us closer to some of these goals?
Yeah, I think maybe the way to square the circle between Arlene's comments with respect to the care economy, the industrial economy, and some of these broader issues, particularly in a world where, as it's been said, a lot of our major industries are dominated by non-Canadian firms. I would be doubling down on entrepreneurship and small business formation. We're heading in the wrong direction on that front. Exits are too high and entries are too low. And, it seems to me one way that we start to fortify ourselves from the excesses and unpredictability of the Trump administration is to cultivate more entrepreneurship and small business in Canada. That doesn't mean unicorn billion-dollar companies necessarily, although some of those would be nice. It also means businesses that are serving their communities in Thunder Bay and Prince George and, Bedeck, Nova Scotia, and all the rest. And in that sense, I think there are some steps the government can take on the tax side, on the regulatory side, maybe with respect to incentives around hiring and investment and so on, to try to reignite the animal spirits when it comes to entrepreneurship and small business formation in Canada.
Can I jump in here?
Yep. But let me just say this. I mean, one of the things I would pick up from that is that instilling confidence in Canadians is a pretty big task for the government right now in policy and, of course, in rhetoric, which may be why we're hearing less of the kind of reality of the situation and more sort of the vision. But Armine, what would you add to that in terms of kind of there's a lot of work that needs to be done to grow at a time when we're also trying to shore up our defenses, and that's a hard push-pull for policymakers to manage through.
100%, Amanda, you're absolutely right. And I agree with you, Sean, that there's more exits from than entrants to the small business sector, which is very much demographically related. So there's a lot of owner-operators that are aging out, and they don't have succession plans. Their kids don't want to take over the family business. They haven't figured out how to move it along. And young people are not in a position to have the capital to start up a small business. So we're looking at a generational sea change that is largely driven by population aging. Canada is not unique in this regard. Any country that had a baby boom after the Second World War is going through some version of this, right? So it's one thing to talk about tax incentives and, wage subsidies and all that stuff. And it's just like, who's going to be the next entrepreneur when the olds leave, right? Because the olds are leaving. And the second thing I would say is, and this is related to the budget, when the olds leave, there's a lot of owner-operators that are selling out to private equity now. Private equity is in a big buyout spree because of this very thing we are talking about. And it is not limited to the services sector or the goods sector or the wholesale. It's not limited to any sector. Buying out what already exists is a way to create scale, which is a way to create profits. And Mr. Carney has said loud and clear, we're open for business, we're open for investments. May I just say, this budget better have some kind of guardrail for investments in the care economy, because there aren't any right now. And we have seen exactly what has happened without guardrails on private sector, in particular private equity investments in health, in childcare, in long-term care. It has been devastating in the United States and the United Kingdom. And we're walking into this story eyes wide shut because we want more investment. It needs to be, what we've got needs to be protected.
Well, can I jump on?
That's like a costless thing in the next budget.
Can I jump on that point though? Because I think it does speak, Amanda, to some like big philosophical questions that the budget itself won't resolve, but I think we need to collectively answer. And it gets at the heart of something I think we've talked about in the past. Our fiscal policy for the past several years has been marked by a high degree of ambition with respect to the role and scope of government. But when it comes to taxation, we're continuing to operate essentially Stephen Harper's tax policy. So we have Justin Trudeau's spending preferences and Stephen Harper's tax policy, and it's created a structural deficit. And it seems to me,
you want to tax the rich?
whether one agrees or disagrees with Armine's worldview, I do think we need to reckon with the fact that we need to reconcile ultimately. Are we prepared to pay for a government that does the things that we're talking about, or do we need to revisit our expectations around the role of government? Running Justin Trudeau's spending preferences and Stephen Harper's tax rates is not a sustainable
it's Jim
policy.
Jim Flaherty's tax rates. Let's call it like it is, Sean. It's the GST cut, right? And we are starting to hear more people talk about raising the GST as appropriate policy. I don't know whether
about
this is
taxing the rich. I don't know if you've heard that one.
Yeah, no, we hear it. It introduces a lot of debate. But I actually do want to ask you guys about the deficit, because sometimes it feels as though nobody cares anymore about deficits. Certainly the voters don't seem to care. But you've both underscored this idea that the economy is going to be worse even than we think. The numbers themselves will worsen and the picture could deteriorate. So in that context, a ballooning deficit becomes a real anchor, a lead weight around your shoulders. So Sean, I'll start with you. I want you both to weigh in on where are you placing that in terms of the importance of this thing and kind of a nod to putting some fiscal guardrails in place.
I think in some way Mark Carney's expressing some revealed preferences when it comes to deficits and debt. His point about balancing the operating budget in 3 years, even this idea of breaking out operating and capital, is a sign that he himself, someone who spent a lot of time in markets, recognizes that this can't go on forever, that even if we don't see a major down payment on deficit reduction in this budget, we're going to see a lot of language trying to reassure credit rating agencies and international bond markets that we quote unquote get it. And I guess we'll have to see whether they find that compelling or persuasive. But it seems to me until we get to this more fundamental question about how big a government we want and how much government are we prepared to pay for, the underlying structural problems inherent in federal budgeting and indeed provincial budgeting across most of our provinces is going to remain.
Armine?
I think Mark Carney has made very clear that deficits are not our number one problem. We are the lowest in the G7. We are approximately a third of the share of GDP in deficits of the United States in 2023-24. We're about a third of the debt level as a share of GDP as the United States. 42% of GDP is an accumulated federal deficit. It's over 100%. It was 121% at the end of 2024 fiscal year. Our debt charges, for every dollar we collect in revenue, we spend 10 cents on debt charges. They spend 28 cents on debt charges.
I don't think it's an apt comparison, though.
I need to say this last bit. Just today, the IMF said the U.S. is currently on track to have a higher debt and deficit level than Italy or Greece, higher than anybody in the 21st century. So we are not in trouble, relatively speaking, but we are under attack. So if we're worried about balancing the books at a time that we're under attack, we've lost the plot here economically, 100%.
let me first of all say I think that comparing us to the US is a bit of a red herring. I mean, you're not going to put your investment portfolio in Italy or Greece. You're going to put it in America and all day long and forever and ever, right? It is the reserve currency of the world. But my bigger problem with this is I kind of like the idea intuitively, right, of saying there are different types of spending and that the capital investments are long term and they deserve to be backed by debt. You don't build a bridge with current operating funds. That makes sense to me. However, and I know people hate when you use household analogies for the federal budget, but I don't care. If I'm paying my mortgage, which is a good long-term capital investment, and my groceries with the same credit card, nobody cares. If I can't pay my credit card off, it's the same payee. And my problem is with this newfangled budget is at some point the global markets might say we don't like your debt anymore, and it's going to get very, very expensive for us, and that can go south really fast.
Two things about that. Canada is the only G7 country other than Germany with the AAA credit rating. And because our debt to GDP and our deficit to GDP is the lowest in the G7, we're not going to lose that credit rating anytime soon, Amanda.
I don't know, Armine.
We already had accrual accounting for these long-term, we already were amortizing our capital stuff. So how he's going to be finessing the capital story, I don't know, but we had already amortized that stuff. We weren't paying for, a road or a bridge in year one. We were amortizing it because we had years of value out of it.
All right, Sean, you can get in here, especially if you agree with me.
Huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, what I would say is, to the Prime Minister and the government's credit, they are not cooking the books. They are not merely relying on definitional changes to solve for their deficit. The budget, according to the finance minister, will still ultimately consolidate the budget so that we can compare it to past years. We've had instances in other cases, particularly the government of Alberta, where these definitional issues were, I think it's fair to say, partly purposeful in terms of trying to obscure or conceal the bottom line. That doesn't seem to be what's happening here. We'll be able to see the consolidated overall picture. But where I agree with Manda is that the definitions that they've set out differ a bit, Armine, from typically what the federal government uses for the purpose of determining whether something is an operating expense or a capital expense. So, for instance, transferring cash to a province or municipality so that they can build and own something has typically been a cash payment, not a quote-unquote investment. So I think the only way, particularly in light of everything we've been talking about, downward pressure on revenues because of the economy, upward pressure on spending because of the challenge represented by the Trump administration, the only way I can reconcile the Prime Minister's ongoing commitment, this is something he said last week in his speech, that we're going to balance the operating budget in 3 years, is that these definitional issues are going to have to do a lot of the work.
My concern is that the capital spending never includes human capital spending. And if you don't spend on human capital, watch what your productivity is going to look like a few years down the road. That is my biggest concern. Though I do understand, as an economist, how difficult it is to operationalize human capital as a form of capital spending. But again, the counterfactual is don't do it. Watch what happens to your economy.
All right. So I want to ask you both what you most hope to see, but I want to put it in this context. So this is a bit of an unwieldy question, but this is a budget from a minority government. It needs to have the support of, let's agree, it's not likely, historically speaking, to be the official opposition. It's likely to either be the Bloc, and I think we know their big ticket item is a lot more spending on seniors, or the NDP, which is probably the more attractive partner. I don't actually know what they're after. I don't think they've said. Armine and Sean, what you'd most like to see, but in that context of the reality of what also has to be in there. Let's start with you, Armine.
Well, if you're asking Armine rather than what I think the opposition parties want, I would say do something about EI, please. We know the 3 major reforms that have to happen. Do it. It doesn't even cost you anything on your books. So just do it in the budget. And another thing that is absolutely cost-free and will make all of the difference is saying you're going to put ring fence around the care economy and how you're letting investments come in. Those 2 things, which are actually cost-free, are such strong signals about how you are seeing how the economy is going to unfold, going down the line. And again, not a penny out of the federal coffer, but a big signal about how am I reading the story as it is unfolding lickety-split. Whereas the NDP, I don't know what they want. I don't know what you're right. I think the Bloc wants more for the olds, which is kind of going counter to every other part of the country. So I don't know where they're going to pick up the extra votes. And I don't even know that they're reading the menu in any other way other than making sure that the official opposition gets a little bit more of what it wants, so it keeps destabilizing things in the event that there is an election called. And that's where I think they're going to, instead of doing any of the things I said, which are cost-free, they're going to put in an investment tax credit or something like that, more tax cuts.
Well, here, Amanda, Armine's calling for revenue neutral things, and I'm the one calling for spending a bit of money.
Interesting.
But one of the unheralded expressions of unanimous parliamentary support in the last parliament was the legislative creation of the Canada Disability Benefit, which had broad support at the legislative stage. And then the government was bizarrely parsimonious when it earmarked resources for the new CDB, such that the vast majority of recipients remain below the poverty line. It's generated a huge backlash from a lot of disability advocates and people in the disability community. And when you get to these like fundamental philosophical questions about the proper role of government, it seems to me that persons with disabilities, our most vulnerable citizens, shouldn't be at the back of the line. They should be at the front of the line. And so if I was advising Prime Minister Carney, I would be increasing the CDB, fulfilling that unanimous parliamentary support, and making the case that this isn't just about helping persons with disabilities. It's defining the proper role and scope of government in our society.
I think that's a really, really well-made point. I want you both to just reflect, because I think Armine has made a super astute point, which is you don't just write the budget in order to appease your way to its passage. You also write it in order to win the election that could follow. And so, yes, what might be in this budget that's really conservative policy or a conservative wish list, but that will, good or bad, what do you think might land in there? And Sean, I'll start with you and then go to Armine. But is there something that's sort of an obvious give to Pierre Poilievre right now at all that would make this easier for that? I don't think they'll support it either way, but would make it easier at the polls if it does go that way.
I don't know if it's for Pierre Poilievre himself, but one thing I think we might see for Pierre Poilievre's voters, if I can put it that way, is some kind of incremental step towards supporting a major carbon capture and utilization storage project in Alberta as part of a package for ultimately approving a pipeline project. That if you think about it, Daniel Smith wants a pipeline. Mark Carney needs to be able to persuade his voters that it is a quote-unquote green pipeline. I think the way to solve that, at least in the mind of the Prime Minister, will be the proponents committing to major investment in the CCUS project, which they would argue requires further public support. So I think if we see a nod to enhanced incentives around CCUS, you may be positioning the Prime Minister to ultimately give an affirmative signal to Premier Smith's pipeline.
Interesting. And I think they've certainly flagged that that's on their radar. So that may well be one of the things they hold off till next week, but we do see. Armine?
Yeah, I actually, I hear exactly what you're saying, Sean, and I agree with you. But to the extent that we are talking about the voters and the politics of a minority budget, maybe facing a loss of confidence in the House, and we go to the polls, Alberta isn't important enough for the Liberals. That wouldn't be the make or break. It has to be something in Ontario or Quebec, something that those voters would go for. And I am hard-pressed to know what that is, right? I know that EI would make a huge difference, but nobody's talking about it. Not provincially and not on the street. I know that if they were maybe to expand pharmacare more, that might make a difference. I don't know, but I don't think they're going to do it. I actually don't know what the policies would be that would appeal. Maybe it would be an investment tax credit.
Well, the only thing I would say,
vote for. That's what businesses vote for.
Yeah,
so I don't actually know what the answer is to your excellent question, Amanda.
Well, the only thing I would say, at the risk of turning wonk into pundit, my only observation would be that Mark Carney wins the next election in a world where the NDP remains below its historic average of support. And so in that sense, the issue may not be so much about appealing to prospective conservative voters as much as it is trying to keep those New Democrats who left the NDP and voted for him in 2025 within his tent. And in that sense, I think a lot of the saber rattling around quote unquote spending cuts may not manifest itself as much as people are expecting, because protecting the government's left flank is the key determinant on whether it wins a majority government. That's less about appealing to conservatives and more making sure that we don't fall into the three-party races that are actually crucial for conservatives to win, if that makes sense.
That's such an important point. Will we see maybe backloaded or vague promises of the cuts that we thought we might get very specific on? We have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But there's so much to chew on in this budget. It's so valuable to have the two of you here to talk it over with. Armine and Sean, thank you so much for your time.
So much
Thanks.
fun. It's great to see you again, Sean. And Amanda, thank you very much for inviting me.
Ditto.
And you've obviously got a new podcast coming up, Pundits.
You'll be on it. We've been talking to Armine Yalnizyan and Sean Speer. Before you go, here are three things we think are worth watching this week. The widely expected cut in interest rates came from the Bank of Canada. Its overnight rate is now 2.25%. With the effects of the trade war and a weak labor market in mind, the bank said that the adjustment to the Canadian economy will reduce our economic capacity while adding to our costs. That's a bad combo, and one best met by fiscal, not monetary policy. Canada played host to the Group of 7 energy and environment ministers this week and promised more action by the end of the week on critical mineral supply chain agreements. The aim here is to reduce the globe's reliance on China for resources that are essential for technology. That might include stockpiling of critical minerals and also agreements on processing. And one for the books. In Alberta, the government again used the notwithstanding clause of the charter to force teachers there off a strike and back into the classroom. But in what could be a first, the government isn't just issuing back-to-work legislation, it's imposing a new contract, one that was soundly rejected by the majority of this unionized workforce. That will be an interesting test of the charter and the override at a time when it is already before the courts. I guess in this case, we're all going to school. That's WONK for this week. I'm Amanda Lang.